Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a video discussing my eyeshadow collection. I have over the past week or two gone through my collection and looked at all my eyeshadow palettes, and I decided to go through my eyeshadows to decide what palettes I would repurchase if all of my eyeshadow collection disappeared. So this is the palettes only. I'm not talking about singles, but if all my eyeshadow palettes disappeared, which palettes would I repurchase? So that is what I'm going to talk about today. But before I jump into the palettes, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So I'm going to go in order of my spreadsheet, which is basically brand order, and I'm going to talk through all of the palettes. So first up, we have Anastasia. And I actually only have one Anastasia palette that I probably would repurchase if all of my Anastasia palettes disappeared. And that palette is the Norvina palette. I absolutely love this palette. It's one that I didn't really expect to become my favorite, because when I initially was into Anastasia, so like what, 2016, 17, 18, 19, around that kind of era, when Anastasia was like top of the game, this was one of my least favorite palettes. I love the color story in theory, but I just didn't really love it when I used it. However, it has grown on me so much. It is again the only Anastasia palette that I would consider to be purchasing, just because I love the rosy tones in here. I love the pinks, I love the purples. I just love the warm tones together with the pinks. I love the shimmers. The shimmers in here are quite impactful, especially for like a mainstream brand. And because of that, this is the palette that I would repurchase. And yeah, again, I went through all my list and like considered each palette by themselves. I didn't really compare like, okay, what would fulfill my collection. I just thought about, okay, these are the palettes that I love enough that I would want to have in my collection again. So yeah, this is the first one. Next up, we have Colourpop, and there's only one palette from Colourpop that I would repurchase again, and you probably can guess which one it is. And that is my Star Wars The Mandalorian The Child palette in collaboration Colourpop. Mine looks like this. It's been very well loved, and I would for sure like repurchase this one. I've talked about this palette all the time, how much I love it, how much I love the color story, how I feel like it's quite a unique color story and palette, especially from Colourpop, which just pumps out palettes all the time. I feel like this was such an innovative color story, and the quality is impeccable. It's so good. I just love the shimmers in here, especially like the Force is my favorite, but I also like Right Hand Mando, Sipping Soup, and Precious Cargo. All of those are just so beautiful, especially in tone, and the masks are really nice. They're really pigmented. I would say the least pigmented shade in here is probably the middle one, Babyface, but due to the color and the nature of the eyeshadow, I don't mind that it's a bit lighter, because you can kind of use it to buff out other shades, or you can build it up if you want full impact. So overall, this is an amazing palette, and I would for sure purchase this again if it disappeared. So those are actually the only like more, I guess, affordable brands, but like, I guess, more mainstream original kind of brands. The rest are unfortunately a bit more expensive. I guess, actually maybe not, but I do have a lot of expensive palettes in here because I feel like the quality is there, and if I were to restart my eyeshadow collection, I would probably invest in these palettes. So next up, we do have Natasha Denona, and there's quite a few palettes here. First up, I want to mention two palettes that are no longer for sale, but I would probably try to hunt these down to repurchase, and that is these two right here. So first up, we have my gold palette. You all know how much I love this one. I talk about it all the time. And yeah, it's such a beautiful palette. I would for sure hunt this down. I would look on it on eBay, Depop, wherever I could find it. I would for sure want this in my collection again. I don't understand why this has been discontinued. It's such a shame, because it's a beautiful palette. It's like my perfect neutral palette. And the shimmers in here are also, I would say, some of the best that I have tried from Natasha Denona. It's just an all-round amazing palette. I talk about it all the time, so I'm not going to talk about it for too long today. But I would hunt this down if I could, to buy it again, even though I can't really get it in stores. But yeah, this is the first one. The second palette I already showed you was the Metropolis palette. Again, this one isn't available for sale anymore, but I love this palette. It's such a beautiful one. It was my first Natasha Denona palette, and I would definitely try to repurchase this again and hunt it down if I could. I would probably prioritize the gold palette, but this is another one that I would try to find again if it disappeared, because it's such a beautiful one, and I feel like you have all the warm tones you could need in here. You also have the greens that I love, and there was one palette that I almost included in here, which was the Mountain Trail palette from Sydney Grace, but I took that out when I took all the palettes out today, because I thought, you know what, I like that palette, but I probably wouldn't repurchase it again. Whereas these greens in here I absolutely love, and I love the quality. I love the like cream to powder formula in here. And if I could get this again, I would have those kind of greens in here. So I would again try to hunt this one down, even though it would be quite difficult because it's not again available for sale. So let's move on to the rest of Natasha Denona palettes because these are still available. We have a couple midi palettes next, and the first one is the Natasha Denona Sendo. This is the last palette that I added to the list because this was actually one that wasn't on my list at all originally. I wasn't planning to purchase this myself. However, I got this one, or I bought it off my friend Martina for very, very cheap, and because of that I got it into my collection and I've been playing around with it since, and I absolutely love this color story. Again, the quality in here is really nice. I love the Natasha Denona formula, and the mattes are just so stunning. I also have a lot of like coral kind of tones right here, like peachy corals, which is something that I didn't really have in any of the other palettes, and kind of due to that I wanted to include this one. And overall, I just think it's a beautiful palette. I also love Natasha Denona because you can take the shadows out and use them as singles as well. So this is the first one out of the midi palettes that I would repurchase. Next up is one that might surprise you guys, because this is actually a palette that's on my shopping block this year, but I have fallen back in love with it. And that is my Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. I really do like this palette. I played around with it a lot this summer, and I created some really nice, well, like summery, sunset, sunrise looks, I guess. And I really like the variety, because if you look at like these 6 here, like just those kind of, I don't know if I can cover these, but those 6 there, you can have a really, really nice neutral eyeshadow look. And then you can like ramp it up with the other 9 and create a really nice, again, colorful but still summery look. And I just love the colors in here. They're very bright. And the formula isn't the best from Natasha Denona. This was one of her earliest palettes, at least the earliest midi palette. I don't know, was this the first midi palette she came out with? It might have been, actually. I think it might have. But anyway, this palette isn't, I guess, as high quality as some of the other Natasha Denona palettes that I mentioned, but the color story is beautiful. And the formula is still nice. It doesn't have any of the cream to powder formulas either, which is one of my favorites. But yeah, it's really good, and I think I would repurchase this one again if it disappeared. Next up, we have my favorite Natasha Denona palette out of the ones that are still available to purchase. So this was a like obvious choice to get again, and that is the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. I absolutely love this palette. I've had this now for just almost a year. I got it for my birthday last year, and it's such a beautiful one. It creates like the best, like rich, like sultry eyeshadow looks. I just love it. I love this palette so much. I love the looks you get from it, and I would for sure purchase this again. I know it's very monotone. I know it's very much like you get the same look with every eyeshadow you use in here, but even so, I just love it, and I do feel like you still have variety in here, although some people say you don't. I do think you have some, although yes, every look they create with this palette is going to be very, very warm toned, very, very rich, but I love it. I just love the formula, I love the quality, I love the shades, and I would for sure buy this again. Then lastly, from Natasha Denona, we do have the Viva palette. This is another larger size. Again, this is another one that I got from my friend Martina, or I bought off her, but it was another one that I wanted to buy anyway. And I just feel like if I was to resort my collection, this would be like the ultimate all matte palette. I mean, it's not all matte, it does have 3 shimmers, but mainly matte, everyday kind of palette to use with all my special indie shadows and things like that. And I would definitely buy this again, especially if I didn't have so many other neutral tones in my collection. Obviously, I do have a lot of palettes that I'm not mentioning in this video, so a lot of them have those kind of brown tones. But if I were to buy only one palette for the kind of neutral brown mattes, or neutral mattes in general, you do have some great tones as well on the bottom, this would be the palette that I would go for. So yeah, I would definitely repurchase this one. So that is the next palette coming up. And next up, we have another quite expensive brand, but these are again investment pieces that I would love to have again, especially if I was downsizing my collection. So that is Pat McGrath, and I'm actually including all my Pat McGrath palettes apart from one. So let's go through them. First up, we have the first Pat McGrath palette, which is Sublime. Is that? No, Subliminal. That's what it's called. This is the cool tone one. This is like the blue kind of gray leaning one. I haven't played around with this one yet, but I just know that I would want this again because of the cool tones in here. This is another one that I bought off my friend Martina, and I'm really, really happy to have it in my collection. It was one that, again, that I wanted to buy anyway at some point. So I'm happy that I could get it from her for a cheaper price. And, you know, the palette is almost untouched. So it was a no-brainer for me. But yeah, I love this color story. I've swatched it so many times. I know a lot of people rave about this one, and this would be my like go-to cool tone palette if I was to start my palette again. I'm going in kind of like this random order with these palettes. They're not like in an order of the motherships, because next up we have Mothership 9, which is the Utopian Dream palette. This is actually my first ever Pat McGrath palette. I got this one for my birthday 2 years ago, and since then obviously I have grown my Pat McGrath collection quite a bit, but this was my first one. I got this one for my boyfriend as a gift, and I absolutely love this one. This was the palette that I selected as like my first Pat McGrath palette that I wanted to try, and I still think it's one of my favorites. I just love the special shades in here. I love the tones. I love that it's like a bit more rosy, a bit more like, it's like rosy warm, I would say. And the mattes in here work really well as well. Yeah, I just love this palette, and I would for sure buy this one again. This was one of the ones that I picked out first that I would repurchase because I just love it so much. And it does also have a special place in my heart because it's my first Pat McGrath palette, and it was a gift from my boyfriend. Another easy repurchase from Pat McGrath is this one right here, which is the Bronze Seduction palette. This one has a lot of obviously bronzy tones, more kind of everyday tones. It does have the pop of red, which I do actually really like. A lot of people say it's like very bright, very out there, and yeah, it is obviously a bright color, but I feel like it's very, very wearable, and I was surprised when I reached for it last time because I didn't know palette behind this palette, and I was really, really surprised with that eyeshadow when I used it because I really, really liked it on my eyes. Apart from that, it has some of my favorite special shades. It have like these two kind of green leaning shades, these two here, and then this rose gold is the most amazing rose gold sparkly shade in my collection. I absolutely love it, and yeah, this is another palette that I would for sure buy again. It would be a really nice everyday palette in combination with some of the other ones, but it does also have that depth, so you can create some really nice smoky looks for date nights and things like that. So that is the next Pat McGrath palette. The second cool tone Pat McGrath palette I would keep is this one here, which is the Divine Rose 1 palette. This is another one that I really love. You can create again some more everyday looks with this one, but leaning more cool toned. I just love the mauve tones in here, and although they are not my go-to mauve tones because they're more kind of grey leaning rather than like the rosy mauves, I still think this palette is really, really stunning, and yeah, the shades in here are just so pretty. Again, you have the special shades which are amazing, and the mattes and like the tones on this side really do work together. Even though it is very kind of mauve toned with the mattes here, you do have some variety because you have these two warmer tone shades. This one has like a pink base with a gold shift, and this one is more of a kind of just pure like gold. It's not the most warm tone gold. It's quite a like almost like white gold shade, and I really do like that one. And if you do use the brown matte in your crease, really sheer it out with one of those, you can create almost like a more warm tone look with this palette. So you do have some variety, and it also has again one of my favorite special shades, which is this one here. Yeah, I love that one too. So that is the next palette I would keep. Then lastly for Pat McGrath, we have this palette here, which is the Mothership number 10 Moonlit Seduction. This was one that I was umming and ahhing about if I would repurchase, but I do think I would because I do really like it. It does have, again, some more neutral tones, and it's not so pink leaning like a lot of her other palettes. Yes, you do have two of these mattes which do have a little bit of a pink undertone, but it's not so pink heavy as some of the other ones. And the special shades in here are unfortunately not baked, but they're still very sparkly, very like wet looking, which is nice. I haven't tried the new palette, the Sunlight Seduction, right? Sunlit Seduction? Sunlit, I think. Sunlit Seduction. And I don't think that's one that I want to pick up. But a lot of people are giving criticism about the special shades in that palette because they're not baked and not very special. But I feel like this palette still does have some of those special kind of qualities to it, although they're not baked. So it's not my favorite Mothership palette, but I do think I will still buy this again, especially because of the color story. And yeah, the special shades are really, really nice. It's just a shame that she didn't include any of the baked shade in here. So before we move on to the next brand, I just need to mention another palette that I completely forgot about when I talked about Natasha Denona. And that is this one here, which is the Mini Retro palette. I completely forgot about the design because it's so small and it was on the side. So this is another one that I would repurchase because I really love this palette and the romantic tones. It's not too deep, and I know that's kind of hinders for a lot of people. It's not really good for deeper skin tones, but for me this one is really good. Like an effortless everyday palette. I can create one look with all of these shades. I can create more of a pink look if I want, more of a grey tone look if I want. So it does have some variety to it, although it's so small. It's a perfect travel palette, and it's one that I can use without really thinking about it. So I do really like this palette, and it's not too expensive either. So it's another one that I would for sure repurchase. So next up we do have Huda Beauty, and I do have 2 palettes from her that I would repurchase. I do have 4 altogether now, so it would be half of what I own, and it's 1 large and 1 smaller palette. I own 2 small and 2 large, so basically half split. The first one is the Rose Quartz palette. I don't think this comes as any surprise to anyone because I talk about this palette all the time and how much I love it. This one again has some mauve tones to it, but this one is more rosy leaning than some of the more cool toned mauves I mentioned before. And it does also have some really beautiful shades. It does have some great tones again that leans quite like rosy, which is really nice. So these undertones are exactly what I like in cool tones, and I can create any kind of cool tone look that I want. You do also have some warm tones on the top row. They're not super warm, but you do again get some variety with this palette, and I just love this palette so much, and I think you all know about that, so I'm not going to talk about it for too long. Then for the small palette that I would like to repurchase if my whole collection disappeared is the Nude Lights palette. This one does have again those kind of rosy tones. This one is definitely way more warm leaning, but you do have those kind of peaches, the pinks, the like browns, the warm browns, and then some beautiful shimmers. I just love this color story, and again it does create like a really nice soft look, which is what I really like, and it's one that I don't know, I just recently been really leaning towards those like softer romantic kind of eyes. Obviously today I'm not wearing that though, but I really have been leaning towards those eyeshadow looks, and this palette is perfect for that. So we only have 2 more palettes to go technically, and the next one is the Kaleidos Sashimi City palette. Again, another brand, but I would for sure repurchase this one again. If it was available, I would probably repurchase the Club Nebula palette, but it is not available, and I don't think I would go through and like try to repurchase it from like eBay or anything like that, because I think it would be really difficult. And although it is a beautiful palette, I don't reach for it enough. So this palette though, I would repurchase. I checked and it's still available. I do think this one is going to discontinue though, which is a shame because I love this palette very much. It's like again a perfect everyday palette for me. You do have some depth with the 2 browns, and then you have like the mustard tone, which I love, and then that kind of peachier tone over here. So another beautiful palette, and the shimmers in here are spectacular. I really love it. And again, it was a no-brainer that I would repurchase this one if it disappeared. The last palette that I have, I will cover it in a second, it's a palette from Sydney Grace, and this is the Tiny Marvels palette. I absolutely love this color story. I have talked about it before, but yeah, it's such a beautiful one. It was such a nice unique palette when it came out, and I think it's still pretty unique. Again, it has still kind of more muted tones. It is colorful, but it's more muted. So I really do like this palette. I love the shimmers in here and the mattes. The formula from Sydney Grace is so good, and this is some of the best eyeshadows that I've tried from them. The eyeshadows are very metallic. They're not very sparkly, which is what I usually go for, but it's nice to have these kind of rich pigmented metallic shades too. The shade Scarab and Firebuds, the 2 shimmers on top, are my 2 favorites, and I really do love them. And then the mattes work really nice. Again, I do love the kind of more muted tones in here. I feel like it's just so stunning, and I would for sure buy this again. So those were all of the palettes that I'm gonna mention like officially. I do have 3 palettes that I wanted to mention because I'm not quite sure about them yet, and there's some simple reasons for that. The first 2 are Natasha Denona, and it's these 2 right here. The first one is the Mini Biba palette, which I have tried this palette, so I have used all the shades in here once, so I do have some experience with it, and I do really like the looks that I created with it. But I do feel like I haven't played around with this one enough to know if I would repurchase. Right now, if I had to make like a hard decision, I probably wouldn't. I would probably buy the Mini Nude palette instead. But it's still up there. There's one that I want to play around with more before I make a decision on it. So that is kind of one that is up in there if I would purchase or not. And then the second palette from Natasha Denona that is similar is the Mini Gold. I do think this is one that I would repurchase because I love greens, which you know. And this one is have the most beautiful green tones, like those kind of earthy green tones. And that kind of gold shimmer in the middle is absolutely stunning. So this is one that I think I would repurchase, but again, I haven't actually played with this palette yet. I do want to. I want to make like a beautiful look with this palette, but again, I haven't gotten around to it. So because I haven't played with this palette, I can't say for sure that I would repurchase because I want to see what the formula is like and the quality. But if again I had to make a decision right now, I would for sure repurchase this one because it's one that was on my list before I got it. Again, I got this from my friend Martina, same with the Biba palette. So I would repurchase one again if the collection disappeared, but yeah, I want to play around with more before I make a full decision. And then the last palette has the exact same reasoning, and that is the VCR Paris Edit palette. This one is in my no palette behind at the moment, but I haven't gone around to trying it yet. And this is another palette that I think I would repurchase again. It wasn't one that was on my list, but I used to love the soft tones in here, similar to a lot of other palettes that I mentioned. So this is one that I think I would repurchase again because I do really like it. But since I haven't played around with the formula yet, and I haven't actually tried with it at all, I'm not 100% sure yet. But I do want to include it in the list because I do think I would, but I'm not set on it, obviously, because I haven't tried it. So those were all of the palettes that I would repurchase again if my whole collection disappeared. And I can put down here how many palettes that is, as well as what the percentage is of my whole collection. I will include the 3 palettes I just mentioned, the ones that are maybes, because I think I would repurchase most of them. Maybe not the peanut butter palette, but just for the sake of this video, I'm going to include them as well. So this is going to be the percentage of how much of my collection I would repurchase again. But that is it for today, you guys. I really, really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Let me know down below if any of these surprised you, if there's anything in here that you thought I would have included, but I didn't. And I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and I'm going to catch you in my next one. Bye, guys.